was talking to Jim Newman before the service, and I said, as the weeks go by this month, our attendance may keep dwindling, even though usually during a regular year in December, it ratchets up. So we will see. We will see what we get by Christmas time, how things are going right now. We are in lesson 5. We can jump right into it unless you have questions or comments that are on topic. Okay. Well, let's get into it. Support and respect is lesson 5. We have a few questions on the opening page, page 35 of your notes. Agree or disagree? Respect must be earned. Gary Peterson agrees. Rick?
Depends on who you got to respect. If it's your elders, it's automatic. It's a command from God. Whether they deserve it or not.
Yeah, it depends on what you talk about when you're saying respect. If we're talking about something like the 4th commandment, honor your father and mother, as we honor and respect our parents, that is a command from the Lord. And we've got to do it even if our parents are terrible human beings. And on the other hand, when we talk about maybe I'm trying to think of a different word other than respect. When we think about the way we think about another person, that's earned. We don't automatically just respect someone because they have a title in front of their name or they have a degree behind their name. They have to earn it. They have to earn our respect in that way. And so it kind of depends on the situation. Just because you go and see a doctor for something, that's wrong. You don't automatically respect them just because it's Dr. so-and-so. They kind of have to earn it, don't they? You go in there a little bit probably cynical and skeptical to see if they really know what they're talking about. Now, on the other hand, as Rick said, if you have a person who is in a position of authority, then that is a commanded type of respect, whether you want to or not. Okay? Second question there. What are some reasons why it's so difficult to respect someone who doesn't seem to deserve it?
I think we lump respect and like in the same category sometimes.
Yeah. Sometimes our respect is fastened to whether they have acted in a way that is honorable, whether they have the skill set necessary, whether they're carrying out their job responsibly. Sadly, that is not always the case. Many times we have to respect someone whether they are good at what they are supposed to be doing or not. It is difficult. Third question, agree or disagree? You should never support someone you don't agree with.
Define support.
Yep, that is the question. On almost all these agree or disagrees, you have to define the words that are being used. So how would you define support here, Dave?
That's what I was asking.
That's why I'm saying up here. That's what I get to ask the questions.
I think it's situation specific. You can support them with their job or moving furniture, but you can't support them if they want to kill themselves or get an abortion or whatever else.
So support can mean agree with. And if we're saying support means agree with, then no, you should not agree with someone. You disagree with what they're doing or what they're saying or what they stand for. That's fairly obvious. If support means to respect and honor, well, going to have to then support someone that we don't agree with. We've been talking about that for weeks now. As we talk about government leaders, there are going to be plenty of government leaders that we do not agree with. Do we still need to support them? In this sense, yes, that we need to respect and honor them simply because of the office that they hold and the position that the Lord Himself has put them in. Okay with that distinction? Continuing then to the next page, unchristian government number 5, King Saul and his army. Acts of paranoia. Saul was jealous of David's success and didn't trust him. Saul accused his son Jonathan of plotting with David against him, even though that, of course, wasn't true. Saul tried to kill David while David was serving him in his castle a couple different times. Saul tried to kill his own son Jonathan for defending David. I don't know if you remember that incident. You might remember Saul trying to kill David with a spear, but Saul actually physically tried to kill his son Jonathan at one point. And then Saul and his army, of course, tried to hunt David down multiple times in order to kill him. I think, if I remember correctly, I've counted how many times in the Bible it mentions that Saul tries to kill David or have him hunted down or whatever it might be. I think I've counted 14 times. That's recorded for us. So it wasn't just once or twice or a month's worth of trying to kill David. It was multiple times over multiple years in multiple ways. What do you think would be the most difficult part of living under this paranoid government leader?
Getting some good solid sleep.
It would be tough to have any peace of mind while this guy is still alive. You never know when he's going to have soldiers break down your door. What was someone else saying?
I think the most difficult thing is staying alive.
Yeah, staying alive. I mean, you're desperately trying to preserve your life, and that was a big part of David's early existence here. And he's just running away and running away and running away and running away. Any other difficult things, Kyle?
Like a couple things, he accused his own son, so you know you're not going to get a pass with anything. And then with David, he knew he was supposed to be the next king, and so he's got to just put up with it and bide his time. I think that I would be getting very impatient.
Yeah, there would be some impatience there, and that's what we're really going to talk about during this lesson. We're going to focus on David's relationship and attitude towards Saul, which is fascinating to me. And we'll see why in a few minutes. Go ahead, Rick.
He had to wreak havoc on his faith. He must have been thinking, God, what are you doing to me?
Yeah, the Lord gives him some very incredible promises early on, and then he has to go through years and years of dealing with this Saul guy. And it's probably, well, I don't want to say probably, it's, as we try to figure out the timeline, how long was it after David is anointed to be the next king by Samuel till when he was actually king? People guesstimated and kind of try to have some sort of timelines. It may be about 15 years. So 15 years from when he's anointed by Samuel, a relatively young man, till when Saul dies and he takes the kingship. That's a long time to deal with this guy who is completely crazy. Page 3. Oh, go ahead, Jim.
I was just going to comment on the picture up there. David looks pretty effeminate. Doesn't look like a great warrior in that picture.
Well, I didn't paint the picture, Jim, so I don't know. Sometimes when you get these paintings, they do depict some males as a little more effeminate than we might be accustomed to or comfortable with in the United States.
I'm a little uncomfortable with that picture.
So yeah, that's not out of the ordinary for someone to do that, and they'll do that with angels sometimes, not female angels, but male angels that look a little more feminine. I don't know why they do that. You're more of a fan of the Michelangelo version, the strong David, which probably he was if he's this great warrior, the strong David with clothes on. Any other complaints about the picture? Now that Tim Berger's not here today, Jim Goodman has to pick up the slack. All right, despite their paranoia, support, and respect. Page 37. Saul gathered 3,000 of his best men and chased David across the country. And now we get to this incident in 1 Samuel 24. A cave was there, and Saul went in to relieve himself. David and his men were far back in the cave. The men said, "This is the day the Lord spoke of when he said to you, I will give your enemy into your hands for you to deal with as you wish." Then David crept up unnoticed and cut off a corner of Saul's robe. I'm assuming most of you remember this particular story. If not, no big deal. That's why we're reading it today. Here is your question on page 37. What would you have done as the next divinely anointed king or queen if you're right behind the man who was trying to kill you in the darkness of a cave with a knife in your hand? Not sure I need you to answer that out loud. It's just an interesting thing to think about. If you have the opportunity to relatively easily take the life of someone who has been hunting you down for years, who has physically and personally tried to murder you on several occasions, and you are given this golden opportunity, and you have guys behind you saying, look what's right in front of you. You better take advantage of this because you know someday Saul's going to get you. Now's your chance. That would be tough for me to pass up. I could have easily justified it in my own mind and said, look, I'm taking his life before he takes mine. This is self-defense. If there's ever a case of self-defense, this is self-defense. I would not feel guilty about it at all. And no one would have blamed me, especially the men with me. And probably no one else in the rest of the country would have blamed me. This is battle. This is war. This is self-preservation. Why wouldn't I do it? Here's what happens next. Afterward, David was conscience-stricken for having cut off a corner of his robe. He said to his men, "The Lord forbid that I should do such a thing to my master, the Lord's anointed, or lift my hand against him, for he is the anointed of the Lord." With these words, David rebuked his men and did not allow them to attack Saul. And Saul left the cave and went his way. What are a few of the ways David showed support and respect to King Saul here? Number one, he spared his life when he had a chance to take it fairly quickly and easily. How else?
He's anointed, recognized his position.
He recognized King Saul's position as the anointed king of God's people. Not just a murderer and a crazy person, which he was. How else?
Well, I think he felt remorse for, cutting the road.
Yes, he was conscience-stricken, as the Bible says. He felt really bad about even touching the robe of the king. Very sensitive conscience. What does he tell the men?
He didn't, attack.
Yeah, do not attack him, because he is appointed by the Lord to be the king of God's people. And you don't touch him.
He told him he had to respect.
Yep, you got to respect him. And I'm sure his men were not happy with that word. I mean, because they're in danger too, of course. If they're siding with David, King Saul is going to have them killed too. No doubt about it. I'm sure they were very surprised at David's attitude here. Because they probably volunteered for it. Look, David, if you don't want to do it, fine, I'll do it. I'll do it for you. Just let me at it. Nope, not going to happen. You're not going to touch him. He is anointed of the Lord. And later on, I don't think it's this incident. Maybe it is. I guess I should have looked it up before class. David does say, the Lord's going to take care of it. He may die in battle. He may die in some other way. But the Lord will take care of it. I am not going to take it into my hands to touch the Lord's anointed. So David had a healthy understanding that the Lord is in control. And yes, someday Saul's going to die, but I'm not going to be the one responsible for it. Go ahead, Jim.
Well, I'm just trying to think back. Isn't David kind of inconsistent? Didn't he, as a leader, wipe out entire villages? I can't remember if it was allies of Saul or allies of the enemy of Saul. But he was pretty brutal. And so on one hand, he was respecting the Lord in this case, but he was also pretty, he was acting in a godly way in many ways during that same time. Isn't that right?
Yes, David is very inconsistent in the way he deals with different situations throughout his life. It was a few years back now, and I don't know how many of you were here for it, but we had a specific Bible study on David, on his life. And we took it in sections, like David as a warrior, David as a musician, David as a father, David as a husband, David as a king. In some aspects of his life, he was very good. He was a great warrior, for example. It's hard to find fault with him as a warrior and a brave soldier. As a father, for example, he was pretty awful. He very rarely comes out looking good as a father. And so as a king, sometimes he acts very well. In this case, he acts like a Christian should act, supporting and respecting the anointed of the Lord regardless of the situation. But then other times, he doesn't act very kingly at all. So you're absolutely right. David is very inconsistent, which means he is very much like us, which is probably part of the appeal of King David as we look at his life and why so many people like him. Because he is flawed in a lot of different ways. But here, in this case, he's about as Christian can be, which is nice. Especially considering some of the other terrible things that he did later on. Dave?
What is the significance of his cutting off pieces of Saul's robe?
Well, the significance is what he's going to do next. And let me just check. I want to make sure. We're going to get to that section next. But he's going to show Saul the proof that he was close enough to take his life if he wanted to. Just to give Saul an idea that I spared your life, I want you to spare mine. And that's what he did. Anything else up to this point? few ways that David showed respect and honor to King Saul. What are a few ways you can show support and respect to your government leaders in the same way David did here? Don't say, not kill them. I understand. That's a legitimate application, but let's move on from that and go ahead, Jim.
I think we have a tendency, especially to get caught up in moments of politics, as Christians, to spend time complaining and saying things that I respect.
Yeah.
Each one of us as Christians needs to think about maybe pulling that down, so that doesn't reflect us as Christians.
So instead of complaining about a government leader, instead of calling them names, instead of running their name through the mud, we as Christians, the way we speak about them to other people, should be something similar to how David spoke about King Saul to his men. Certainly, David and his men knew how evil Saul was. And yet David says, look, he's appointed by the Lord himself as king over our people. That means we need to respect and honor him, no matter how terrible he might be. Chuck?
I think of it as respecting the position, like the position of the president. I'm just going to use that as an example, but not because I can't sanction. It'd be like if Herod was, and he's a murderer. You can't somehow. I mean, we know that they all come to power only because God lets them, but I find it hard to respect a murderer, or, you know what I mean, even if they're in the position of whatever, presidents, whatever they are. So I have a little conflict in my mind with that. I mean, I know that they're in that position, but I have no problem calling them out for the wrongdoing that's taken place.
Yep, and that goes back to our definition of what respect is here. If respect means that we are agreeing with what they are doing and supporting it in that way, then that certainly is not what we are supposed to be doing as Christians. We talked about John the Baptist today, and John the Baptist got thrown in jail for confronting the king for doing something wrong. That doesn't mean he was disrespecting the king. That doesn't mean he was dishonoring the king. It simply means he was doing, as a prophet of the Lord, or even as a Christian, what a Christian is supposed to be doing. Pointing out something sinful so that they see their wrongdoing and come to grips with it so that they can see their Savior. So there's a difference between not agreeing with something that a person does and disrespecting them.
Okay, that's a good example, actually.
Let me just give a modern day example. A modern day example with, let's just use our current president, President Trump. Here's a good way and a bad way of the same situation. A Christian way would be saying something like, I wish President Trump would stop tweeting. It doesn't do him any good. Okay? You're kind of criticizing maybe what he is doing or how he is doing it, but you're doing it in a relatively respectful way. A bad way would be something like, President Trump is such an idiot for tweeting this whatever comment that he just made, that I cannot believe how dumb he is acting. That would not be a Christian way of approaching that same topic. So you're still criticizing the president, but one way is doing it in a respectful way, and one way is doing it in a disrespectful way.
Good. Thank you.
Anything else on that? Let's see. Any other ways you can show respect and support for your government leaders, even when they might be murderers, like Saul was here? just talked about the question at the top. There is a difference between disagreeing with them and disrespecting them. We should disagree with many, if not all, of our government leaders, because as we've been saying again and again, almost every government leader is going to do things or say things that we would not agree with as Christians. It's okay to call them out on that. It's okay to disagree with them. It's okay to tell others that you disagree with them. But how do you go about disagreeing? Can you do it in a respectful way or not? When people are not honoring government leaders, how can you handle a situation like David? Just like his men, we're not honoring the government leader.
Pray for them, because
Yeah.
we're told to pray for them.
Good. We pray for them, and what else?
I suppose act in a way that is not, I'll call it contention seeking.
And we encourage other people to do the same. That we don't just lead by example, but sometimes we have to lead by our words. And we might have to tell someone, look, I know so-and-so is a pretty terrible politician. However, they are an elected leader, and we got to respect them anyway, because of the office that they hold. Sometimes you have to stand up for someone that you don't necessarily agree with as a Christian.
I think it's helpful to be specific too. Like, I don't like such and such policy, or I don't agree with like abortion or whatever. I don't agree with that. I know they're in that, like, so I think it helps to be specific, and even when people criticize them, to be, like, I found it helpful to be specific about what this person did that I think was good for our country and our Christian cause, and so be specific and not just antagonistic, like Dave was saying.
And I have to do that with my kids all the time. Because as all of you know, kids like to criticize adults, and especially teachers if they're in school. And so many, many different times I've had to say to my kids, look, this person might not be a good teacher, however, it's not okay for you to badmouth them because of who they are, or what they look like, or what they said, or whatever it might be. So sometimes I might agree with my kid about how terrible this particular teacher is. Doesn't matter. They're your teacher. You still have to respect them and honor them, even when they're not around. Same thing with government leaders. In fact, now that I'm thinking about it, I had to do that with one of my kids a few years back. I can't remember, it was one of the boys. They're coming in from school into the house. And the comment was, not to me, but I think to his brother, Obama's an idiot. And I stopped and I said, why? Well, he just is. Do you have any basis for that comment? Regardless of whether I agreed with them or not, it didn't matter. You can't make that comment as a Christian. You might think it, you might respectfully disagree with what any different president is saying or doing, or any politician. But of course, they're picking that stuff up from classmates and just repeating what they're hearing and whatever it might be. And so you have to, as a Christian, whether it's with a kid or an adult, you have to, as a Christian, stand up for those whom the Lord has put into positions of authority, regardless of whether you voted for them or like them or you still have to be respectful. And that's what I ended up telling whatever son it was a few years back. I said, look, there are going to be plenty of politicians in your life that you think are idiots. And it may be true. But you can't go around saying that because you still have to respect them. Doesn't matter, just like your teachers, just like your parents. You probably are going to think that I am an idiot quite a bit throughout your life. And I may be, doesn't matter. Okay, so far? We are to now what Dave had brought up before, and this is something that's Then David went out of the cave and called out to Saul, "My lord the king, see my father, look at this piece of your robe in my hand. I cut off the corner of your robe, but did not kill you. Now understand, you guys, that I am not guilty of wrongdoing or rebellion." What 3 names does David give to Saul that show how he honored his government leader? Father, Lord, and King. He's very respectful to Saul, even with the names that he is using, and that of course applies to us, and that's the last question on this page. What are some of the names, or how can we use some of the names to be respectful to our government leaders? Do you have any ideas on that?
Using their position when you're talking about them instead of just saying their first or last name.
Okay, sure. That would be a good way to start. So instead of calling him Donald, maybe we call him President Trump, simply as a sign of respect.
Returning to the custom, referring to people you don't, it's along the same lines, but people that you don't know really well, as Mr. So-and-so, Mrs. So-and-so, just a sign of respect.
In our culture, that does make an impression. When you are a little more formal, and you say Mr. or Mrs. or Senator or whatever it might be, when you're formal like that, that automatically means that you are showing that person respect in our culture. And so that probably is a pretty decent way to demonstrate to people that you are trying to respect them without saying it sarcastically, by the way. That doesn't count. You can't say it sarcastically and still be respectful. So that probably is a good way to do it as Christians in general. Are there other ways that you can use names or terms or titles in a respectful way? John?
I notice you can almost always tell if someone's in the military or law enforcement the way they say yes ma'am, or, you know, and you can really tell it's a good discipline or training because it is a respect thing.
Yep.
Yes ma'am, thank you ma'am, like,
The politeness, the manners, and then the terms and titles and names that you use are all going to go along those same lines. How are you treating the President of the United States, senators, representatives, mayors, anything? I mean, people around you will see and hear what you do as a Christian. And the way you treat your government leaders will make an impression on them. Especially if they know you don't agree with them and you're still treating them with respect. That goes a long way. Side note, just to maybe reinforce this point. My parents, when we were growing up, were very careful never to speak badly about people, especially in front of us as kids. And they would always kind of chastise us if we were criticizing or negative about whoever it might be. And so I was in high school, and I went to a friend's house, and his mother was just verbally lambasting another family's mom. And I was completely shocked. Because I've never heard that from an adult, just going off on another adult. And so the reason I bring that up is because it made an impression on me that when you as a Christian are acting in this way, that is Christian, on a regular basis, it does have an effect. It does rub off on people around you. And they notice if something is different. They will notice when someone else starts to act or say things in a different way than you do. You should set yourself apart from other people in this world. And that's one of the connections that we have to Old Testament Israel, by the way. A lot of times we say, well, those things in the Old Testament don't really apply to us. That's true in general. We don't have to follow the worship regulations and the rituals and all that kind of stuff. But part of the reason the Lord made all of those specific regulations for His people, and He says it multiple times in the Old Testament, was, you are my chosen people. I want you set apart from everyone else. I want you special. I want everyone to see that you're special because you're doing these purification rituals and you're not eating pork and you're not working on the Sabbath day and all these other things that set you apart. That's the connection we have to Old Testament Israel. We should be setting ourselves apart from other people, other non-Christians especially. We should be acting differently. We should be speaking differently. We should be living differently. If we aren't, there's a big problem. Same goes with this topic. The way we treat our government leaders should be drastically different than the way non-Christians treat their government leaders. Because we have a reason to do so, and they don't. You should look different. Amen. Anything else on that for page 39? Acts 23. It's printed for you on your piece of paper. This is Paul on trial for no other reason than he was preaching the gospel. The high priest Ananias ordered those standing near Paul to strike him on the mouth. Then Paul said to him, God will strike you, you whitewashed wall. You sit there to judge me according to the law, yet you yourself violate the law by commanding that I be struck. Those who were standing near Paul said, you dare to insult God's high priest? Paul replied, brothers, I did not realize that he was the high priest. For it is written, do not speak evil about the ruler of your people. Why would Paul show respect to someone who had him slapped?
He was a leader appointed by God.
Yep. God had appointed him as the high priest, and Paul said, I apologize. I didn't know he was the high priest. And don't ask me the question, why didn't he know he was the high priest? Because I've wondered that, and I'm not quite sure why he didn't know that. Or maybe he didn't know it was the high priest who gave the order to have him slapped. I don't know. But apparently, Paul was a little apologetic here. If I had known he was the high priest, I would have said that to him, because God says I'm supposed to honor the leader of the Lord's people. My bad. Take it back. Even though what the high priest did was wrong. All he can say is, you're going against the law, I have to be slapped. You can't do that. Next example, Daniel chapter 6. We just talked about Daniel's day a little bit. At the first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions? Daniel answered, O king, live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight. nor have I ever done any wrong before you, O king. How did Daniel show respect to the one who sanctioned his execution?
Addressed his title and said, long may you live. I mean, he didn't even act like he was mad at him, like for what he's doing.
Yeah. He did not seem angry at the king. He did not say, oh, you son of a gun. You threw me in here. Look what the angel did. Now you are going to get it. He said, oh, king, live forever. I've never done anything wrong against you. But you threw me in here anyway. And the angel closed the mouths of the lions. Daniel's very respectful to the king right here. When most people probably wouldn't be. It probably would be a little bit angry. Next example on the next page, 1 Samuel chapter 26. So David and Abishai went to the army by night, and there was Saul lying asleep inside the camp with his spear stuck in the ground and near his head. Abner and the soldiers were lying around him. Abishai said to David, today God has delivered your enemy into your hands. Now let me pin him to the ground with one thrust of my spear. I won't strike him twice. But David said to Abishai, don't destroy him. Who can lay a hand on the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? As surely as the Lord lives, he said, the Lord himself will strike him. Either his time will come and he will die, or he will go into battle and perish. But the Lord forbid that I should lay a hand on the Lord's anointed. Now get the spear and water jug that are near his head and let's go. There is the section that I was thinking of that I couldn't remember where it was. In what ways did David once again show honor to King Saul?
I can't, he didn't kill him.
He did not kill him, number one. What else? He did defend him. He would not let Abishai kill him either. And then the third thing, like I mentioned before, he puts it into the Lord's hands. The Lord will take care of it. I don't need to take care of it. I'm going to let the Lord deal with it, but I will not be responsible for killing the king's anointed. What I probably should put in this lesson, and maybe I will next time around, is the story when Saul does die. He dies in battle. And Saul ends up killing himself. He's wounded, he's surrounded, and then he tells his armor bearer to kill him, and the armor bearer says, I'm not going to kill you. Kidding me? So he falls on his own sword. Well, David hears about how Saul dies, and his son Jonathan, David's best friend, dies. He's distraught. Well, there is a foreigner, and I don't remember where this guy's from, but he's on Israel's side, whether he's an Ammonite or whatever. He takes the crown of Saul and his sword, I think, and brings him to David. And says, hey, I saw Saul on the top of this mountain. They're surrounded. And he told me to kill him because he's wounded. So I killed him, and I took his crown and his sword and brought back to you to show you that Saul's dead. You can be king now. And David said,
How dare you?
he did not say, well done, faithful servant, like this guy thought he would because he killed his arch enemy. David said, well, now you're going to die for it. You said yourself that you killed him. You killed the Lord's anointed. You're going to die. And he died right there. David gave the order for his soldiers to strike him down. He struck him down. And that's what you get for killing the Lord's anointed. So it's just another example in a string of examples of David saying, time and time again, you do not treat the Lord's anointed officials with anything but complete respect, no matter who they are. And David, of course, had the authority to do that, because he was now king, and he gets to exact the death penalty when and where he wills. Lord has given him that. And we might think that's a little harsh. Maybe it was a little harsh. But it would be similar, if you will, to someone assassinating the president. And the next president saying, you will get the death penalty for that. Of course, the president doesn't have that authority in our country, but a judge or a jury would say, you're going to get the death penalty for it. That's what David did. You get the death penalty for assassinating the king. I know you think that you're trying to help me, but that's not what you're supposed to do.
Well, at that point, still showing respect.
Yep. Still showing respect to the former king. Yep. That guy didn't actually kill Saul. That's the crazy part. Remember, Saul killed himself. And so this guy was trying to get honor for himself and get David's good graces and backfired. There are people from the town of Jabesh Gilead that was in the land of Benjamin where Saul was from. And they went and they got, the Philistines cut off Saul's head and they hung his head and his body up on the wall of their city. So the people of Jabesh Gilead went by night and they took Saul's body down and they went and buried it back in Benjamin. And so David commended the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead for doing that because they were honoring the king. Where am I at? Last passage here, back to Romans chapter 13. Give everyone what you owe him. If you owe taxes, pay taxes, and revenue, then revenue. If respect, then respect. If honor, then honor. Remember, Romans 13 is that essential part of the New Testament that talks about how we are supposed to treat the governing authorities. This is the end of that section. A summary by Paul to make sure that we are doing what we are supposed to be doing as Christians. List a few ways you can carry out this scriptural instruction better than you have before. Can you think of any specific ways?
Actually doing some of that versus things we've talked about, complaining or bad-mouthing or whatever.
Most of the time, if we're talking about this topic, it has to do with what's coming out of our mouths.
I lost the thread of the conversation. Could you rephrase what you said?
Anyway, at least she's listening to the Bible study. What we say makes a difference. And when we show respect and honor for people, and especially our government leaders, what we say is going to demonstrate the faith that we have in our Lord and His Word. And so we can't complain about them, and we can't grumble about them, and we can't badmouth them, and we probably do. How can we change that into something positive, something healthy, something that shows people around us what we really stand for, whether we agree with that person or not? It usually is going to have to do with the way you speak and the words you use, and probably the tone of voice you use too. As I've said before, you as a Christian, whether you want to be or not, are an example to those around you. You might not think they do, but they do watch you. And they do listen to you. Christians and non-Christians. Christians because you're a Christian. And non-Christians because you're a Christian. They want to see what you say. Keep that in mind as you go about your daily life that deals with government leaders. you are setting the pace for the people around you. And the Lord does respect that when you respect the leaders He has put in place, especially when they aren't good leaders. Yes, Charlie?
I find it most helpful to be specific. I know I already said that, but this is what I agree with or don't agree with and why, and keep it at that. Whether it's abortion or, that's a huge one for me with everything going on, because I think that that's what's important to God, what matters to God. So, and that's why, and that's what I say, and I try to leave it, specifics rather than, being derogatory, calling idiots, whatever, calling names is never good.
Yeah. Good point. Yeah, stay away from name calling.
Yeah.
Just stick to some factual things that you do or do not agree with.
On that note, our media is a terrible example. Oh my goodness. But again, they're not Christians, so unless they are Christians, then maybe they're different. But
Yeah, media is a terrible example. The regular way of culture is terrible. Politicians are terrible. Presidential debates are terrible because it is personal attacks and name calling almost across the board. So we do get sucked into it. I understand it's hard to it's hard to keep yourself separated from all that kind of stuff, but that's why we talk about in Bible class and application of scriptural principles, so that we as Christians can stand out and stand apart from the regular sinful things that are being done and said. Shouldn't surprise you, it's what we should be doing every day. Any final thoughts on this lesson? One more lesson left that is entitled, You Have a Responsibility as a Christian. So we'll look at some of the responsibilities we have as Christian citizens in this world and how we go about dealing with a life and a country and a world that is usually dead set against our Christian principles. Okay? Close with prayer. Dear Lord, you ask us to respect and honor our governing authorities, not because they've really earned it, but because you ask us to do it. Help us to do so in honor of you, because we know that in this way we are praising and thanking and worshiping you, even if we completely disagree with those who are in authority over us. Help us to be true Christian examples for those around us, not just so that they can act more like we do, but so that they can see our faith shining in our lives, and we have an opportunity then to share that peace with them so that they too not only can act like us, but believe whom we believe. I pray these things in your name. Amen.